I'm a director in supply chain engineering organization at Wayfair. I'm going to talk about operational software, so software that supports core business operations. Just a little bit of background if you don't know what Wayfair is. We are an online home goods retailer. Our general mission is that we provide a large product assortment at different price points to give customers shop for home furnishings and decor that fit their design style so that everybody can live in a home that she loves. This is meant to be conversational, so if you have any questions as I'm going through this, please stop, raise your hand, or just shout out a question. It's pretty informal. Just to give you kind of an overview of what the supplemental slides that I have here. I'll go over kind of my career path, like how I got to where I am today, talk about operations engineering, kind of what it is, why it's important to the business, and why I personally like doing it, and then just leave some time at the end for any other specific questions that we don't cover through the presentation. So first, just kind of a shout out to a typical metaphor that you may hear as you start your career is, viewing your career as a ladder, which is, a serial progression of roles that you kind of look at, like, I'm going to do this thing and then the next thing, and I'm going to get promoted to X, Y, and Z. We encourage you not to look at it like that necessarily because, ladders kind of give you one path up. It's hard to, like, if you got somebody in front of you, like, get around them. There's no room for lateral movement or anything like that. So I like to view it more like a jungle gym, right? Multiple people could get at the top. There's not just one person that gets to the top of it. You have several folks that are kind of helping and collaborating along the way up. Getting into my background in particular, so start with, I worked at Chili's in high school, which not super relevant right now, you might think, but it did give me kind of the frontline experience of doing customer service, like in a retail environment. So understanding, like, if the point of sale system is down, if the back office systems are down, and you've got people there that are like lining up and probably yelling at you, like what that actually feels like, and building that empathy, I think, is pretty important. So I did my undergrad at MIT, did a good amount of research there, worked on a project that was like, it was an augmented reality game that was targeted for educators and students, so like they could set up a fake chemical spill that students would have to like physically walk around with. At the time it was PDA with Bluetooth GPS connected to it, right? Like slightly before smartphones became more ubiquitous, but that was pretty cool. So that was my first like collaborative, like big software engineering with like actual end users. Did an internship with Direct Technologies, which is a pretty large print shop in Atlanta. That's where I learned like the actual, customer facing pressures of like having software done, keeping software systems up and running and things like that. Out of college, I started working for a startup called Intelligent Devices. We did systems for transportation and traffic control, so stoplights, cameras, vehicle detection, that type of thing. It was a startup that we ended up getting acquired a couple years ago by a mid-sized firm, Delcan. So in the startup environment, you kind of have to wear every hat that there is. So you're doing a little bit of software engineering, hardware design, embedded engineering, project management, bid response proposal, interviews for bid contracts, like all that kind of stuff. Gave me pretty good exposure to a bunch of different things. As we got acquired by Delcan, that's where I first started seeing corporate processes and like some of the more like bureaucratic things around software engineering and like how to get stuff done in a larger corporate ecosystem and environment. I was at IDI Delcan for about 5-6 years, made the jump to Home Depot, where I started out in store operations software. So those are software systems that run the stores. So you think point of sale is kind of an obvious one. There are some more invisible to customers, like inventory management systems, shipping and returns out of the back, the camera systems that are targeted for loss prevention and asset protection and things like that. There's at any given retailer, there's probably 30 or 40 systems that actually drive running the store itself. And then after about 2.5 years, I moved from store operation software to enterprise architecture within Home Depot, kind of took a lateral promotion outside of the group. And then my customer capacity were more software engineers. So we did like developer tools, software platforms, cloud platforms, that type of stuff. Just kind of a shout out to continual learning, since you're kind of getting towards the end of college as you graduate. while I was at Depot and kind of throughout my career, I've continued to like take classes at different places. So I've continued to take about a class a year at Georgia Tech in different kind of subject areas, project management, finance, et cetera. I did my MBA at Georgia while I was at Depot, so I just wrapped that up this year. So for the last like 2 or 3 years, that was my main focus in terms of continuing education. That also led me to expanding my vision for like looking at the opportunities in the market, which ultimately landed me at Wayfair, which kind of towards the end of the program, as you do at university, you start looking at career, writing your resume and looking at career options. Kind of the same thing for me. Plus, I had gotten some advice from mentors I had in the field and at other companies to get some experience outside of the Southeast, which I had been in Atlanta for pretty much my entire career. So maybe move up to Boston, and the supply chain space in particular interested me. I've always been kind of like undergrad was math computer science, so I've always been kind of like an optimization, like process efficiency kind of guy. Okay, any questions on that? All right, cool. So getting into it, I'm going to go through kind of explaining what I'm not talking about by operations engineering first, not to necessarily denigrate any of these areas. And as we have software teams that support all of this type of software as well, but just to explicitly call out what we're not talking about, we're not talking about like operations as far as IT operations. So we're not talking about keeping your infrastructure running, keeping your apps up and running for the customers. We're also not talking about DevOps, which you may have heard either in classes or kind of in industry research, which is more around, blending the software engineering and the ongoing operations of that software into a single team that kind of owns everything and doing like mixed practices of engineering and operations. Not talking about that here. We're also not talking about end user facing apps, so things you download the App Store, websites you can get to. That's not what we're talking about. Nor are we talking about internal apps that are targeting, HR or accounting systems or CRM, generally outside of not looking at the SG&A, sales, general, and administrative apps. What we are talking about is the applications, software, and systems that run the actual business and the way that the business generates value, right? So just some pictures for illustrating in supply chain. Every company pretty much has varying scope, so there's a ton of software and systems that have to work together to make the movement of goods or interaction with suppliers seamless, especially nowadays. In a brick and mortar retail establishment, as I mentioned, through my experience at Depot, there's tons of stuff that go into the operation of the store to service the customers that are kind of going on under the hood that as a customer walking into the store, you may not notice as you're just going through. And then also, I don't have a whole lot of specific career experience here, but it also dovetails into kind of like factory operations, so systems that control line facilities, alerting, monitoring, guidance for the folks that are on the factory floor as well. So where do you see the impact for this? There are a couple ways. So first, some companies are able to generate such good expertise and provide services that they will offer services in their operation. They'll generate actual revenue where they may sell like a piece of their logistics expertise or other expertise that they've developed internally to other companies, right? And you'll see that in some companies will spin off divisions to provide service to other, whether it's retailers or logistics companies or things like that. That's generally less common than the core thing is driving down costs, right? So one obvious is kind of fuel costs, especially in supply chain. Like the more you can drive down your transportation costs, the higher leverage you have kind of across, generating a wider profit margin, which typically it's quite a bit easier to reduce your operational costs than it is to increase your revenue to get the same kind of net gain in profit margin. So some of the math that's behind that, just kind of as an illustrative example for the leverage that you can provide. So if you're targeting about 1,000 associates with your software, which is not a fair number if you've got a supply chain operation or retail operation, those numbers might get much higher. But if you save 30 seconds a day in your software engineering, whether it's from reducing page load times, optimizing user flows, anything like that, you're saving the company, essentially $150K a year roughly per 30 seconds per 1,000 associates. That gives you a good directional view. You can't really like capture that value necessarily, but it allows you to think about where you can allocate those time savings to more productive activities. Whether it's staffing people more on customer service or frontline sales type of activities, as opposed to just sitting and waiting for a system to respond or something like that. Or obviously cost out direct cost savings. This, as I mentioned, that's kind of like why it's important to the business, right? Is the increase of the profit margin generally on the cost out. Why I like it is, to the point of the slide, it's not all about the money, right? If you think about it, the folks that you're targeting with operations software who are working, there's maybe hourly or salary to serve in a store, in a supply chain. Some of them may not use computers outside of the office. Some of them may not even use smartphones outside of the office. If you think about a consumer app that you're targeting for just a general audience, it's real easy. If your app's not working on your phone, you just close the app and move on and do something else. The systems that you're creating for folks that are on the frontline operations of your business, they have to use those to do that. They're using them for the majority of their 8-hour workday, which is essentially like a third of the day for most days. Your system doesn't work or causes friction, that like directly impacts their overall quality of life for a sizable portion of their life. So one thing that I'm real passionate about and like doing is seeing those improvements to the associates that are on the front line. So it's super important to get out onto the front line, like do the jobs that the folks that are doing in the warehouses, in the stores, in other operational areas. So I try myself to get out to facilities every 2 months, not just to walk and interview, but to actually do the job. So I'll go to one of our supply chain facilities, check out a scan gun, and load and unload trucks for a day to see, like, not just for an hour, because there's a lot, like when you're in the 4 hours of running a dolly back and forth, there's a lot of fatigue that settles in, and that amplifies frustrations that you might have with the systems, right? So it's real important as you get into operational capacities to like build that empathy and understand exactly what you're looking at. And then, just delighting your users and making it a little bit easier for them to work. Like, a lot of folks, you got to go to work, you got to go to the job. But if the systems and stuff are easier and you're not standing in front of customers, or like you can't load a truck because you don't know what products are going on if your systems are down, those are big, very stressful kind of environments that we try to avoid. From like a role perspective of what we see targeting the folks at Wayfair and kind of generally in software, I'm not sure to what extent you have exposure to this in school, but what we normally see in the development life cycle is we'll have a mix of software engineers is generally the primary role in a single delivery team, paired with a product manager who's, to your point, you said you've gotten a little bit more into product management, kind of looking at the roadmap and backlog building and understanding what the user pain points are, what we're going to be working on for, not just the next couple weeks, but the following like quarter or half year. That also goes hand in hand with the user experience design and research. So, the user experience researcher role is of folks who are like skilled in going out and observing and interviewing field associates who are actually doing the jobs and understanding not necessarily what they're asking for in terms of software enhancements, but understanding like what we need that they may not be looking for. And then the designers are typically the ones that will lay out the like actual prototypes, from paper prototypes that we take to the field and then to the actual like screen mock-ups and implementation of the designs and flows that we identify. I think we've got about 5 minutes left, so as I mentioned, I want to leave a fair amount of time for questions or anything. Just wanted to open up to the floor. Any questions about?
Something, is that like part of the job, or is it something you like to do?
I view it as part of the job, but it's not necessarily something where anybody's telling me like go to a facility every so often, right? It's something that I'll I'll take out on my own volition. Like I'll reach out to, generally there'll be a general manager of the facility. So I'll reach out to the general manager, establish some rapport with them, which in the delivery of software, you typically have those relationships established anyway. But it's something where if I'm traveling anyway and we have a facility nearby, I'll try to loop it in with that. If we're piloting software in a particular region or at a particular facility, I'll try to loop it in with that. But if it gets to a point where it's been 2 or 3 months and I haven't had the opportunity to do that, I'll reach out to the facility manager, make sure it's a good time for them, because you don't want to interrupt the operations. You don't just want to show up unannounced. Because one thing too, that as you get into software engineering, and I've had folks on our teams come to me and say like, I didn't realize until I went to the facility, but like we're corporate. Like if you go to the field, like you're corporate. Like you're the one that's enforcing these policies and building these systems that are sometimes frustrating to use, right? So, there is some amount of that you have to understand that as you go into the field too, right? Is that you're not just there for your own volition, but like you're representing kind of the corporate culture. So you don't want to just surprise them and whatnot, and you want to be helpful, because the general idea is that you're like, what's up?
You didn't just start a new group, did you?
No.
No, we were wrapping up.
Okay.
No, yeah. So yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
I was just saying, it was interesting because I've had a couple of internships where I worked on projects and then just like write the code and be done with it. And I'm not really sure like where it goes. So I just think it's cool that you
Yeah,
see the different levels.
yeah, that fire and forget is tough. Like that's, if you're not getting those constant quick feedback loops, like especially if you're spending like 6 months or a year developing and then just like unleash it on the field, you're setting yourself up for failure that way. Yeah.
And just to add to that, I don't have the kind of experience you do, but I have found it's generally well regarded if you ask to go and say, like, I'd like to see who uses this.
Oh, yeah.
Talk to them. I'd like to see what's happening with it. And people generally feel it's, even if they, for whatever reason, say, no, you can't do it, maybe they don't have the budget.
Yeah.
It's a very good thing to ask.
Yeah. If you get told no, if you're asking to go out to the field, definitely do some introspection at that point and be like, okay, what does this really mean? Yeah. Cool. Anything else? All right, we'll release you to the next session. All right, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Awesome, thank you. How do we get?
I'm going to talk about operations software. So that's software that supports kind of the core operations of the business, how it makes money, and how it impacts profit. Just to give the folks in the room a little bit of background in case you don't know about Wayfair. Wayfair is an online. We sell a wide assortment of home decor and home products, at various like price points and styles, targeting folks so that they can live in a home that they love. That style choices that go into furnishing a home or an apartment or a condo or whatever it is. So we try to customers to whatever product, whatever style that they're looking for. Okay, so let's jump into it. Again, this is meant to be a bit supplemental. The supplies are just supplemental. So if you have any questions as we're going through, shoot up a hand and I'm happy to answer them as we're going through. Sometimes that's easier than taking them all at the end, but I'll leave some time at the end as well for anything that we want to clean up. Just to give you an idea of what we're going to look at here. So I'll go through kind of my career progression, how I got to where I am and some of the choices that I made. Talk about operations software itself, kind of what it is, and why it's important both to business and why I think it's important to me personally. Then, like I said, we'll leave some time for any wrap-up questions at the end. So first, I just wanted to give a little bit of advice. As you get into your careers, you'll see some folks will maybe tell you about climbing the career ladder and getting how you get to the top, how you get to the next role. I generally don't like that metaphor just because it gives you like a vertical serial progression, and really like if you got one ladder, there's only room for one person at the top, and really like your career is a more collaborative. Like if you think of a jungle gym, like the bunch of people can get to the top of the jungle gym. There's usually a bunch of people kind of working together to kind of climb it. So just think of it that way. And there may be like, lateral moves that you might want to make at some point, or, in some cases it may make sense to take what you might see as a demotion into a different business function or business area just to get like a more comprehensive rounded experience. To talk about my career progression specifically, so I started, I like to bring up Chili's. It's not super relevant right now necessarily, but I worked at Chili's in high school, which kind of gave me my first exposure to, actual frontline customer service, right? So from a systems perspective, understanding what it means when your point of sale is down, your back office systems are down, you've got a line of angry customers that you're basically just standing there unable to do anything. Like actually having that experience and having to go through the stress and anxiety associated with people standing in front of you trying to pay you money it definitely sheds a lot of light into kind of like how I approach problems these days. Did undergrad at MIT. While I was there, I did software research, which was a lot of software development, primarily on an augmented reality game that targeted students and particularly teachers. So teachers could set up like a chemical spill or a nuclear reactor incident where the students would have to like physically walk around the campus to interview people and determine like the source of the spill and counters and stuff like that. So that was pretty cool. Kind of my first like team software, non-classroom engineering experience. From there, I did an internship at Direct Technologies, which is a large print shop in Atlanta. There I learned a lot about kind of how software and computers and systems impact like businesses to the point where they're trying to actually get product out, right? So the importance of deadlines and delivery and like, being able to like book revenue for customers and things like that. My first job out of school was at Intelligent Devices. It was a civil engineering transportation systems consulting startup. So it was a pretty small operation, which meant as a startup, you do everything. Like my role was systems engineer, but I did mainly software engineering, but also hardware design, embedded programming, project management, bid response, RFP writing, like you name it, it was pretty much in the job description. A couple years into that, we were acquired by a mid-sized firm, Delcan. That got me a little bit more exposed to kind of a larger corporate operating environment, not super big, but at least dipped my toes in the water in that area, understanding some of the politics and red tape that are around some things, trying to get like actual work done. I was at Delcan IDI for about 6 years total. Made the move to Home Depot, also in Atlanta. Was in store operations there for my first 2.5 years. Store operations software is basically like all the software that makes the stores run for customers to buy products. So the obvious is the point of sale, like the cash registers and everything, some of the design computers, but there are also a lot of invisible systems, like the inventory management system, receiving, reverse logistics, some of the asset protection and loss prevention, like the cameras, various integrated systems. All in all, it's about probably 30 or 40 like distinct separate systems that were internally developed that run the operations of the store. I was at Depot about 5 years total. The last 2.5 years, I took a promotion kind of outside my group into the enterprise architecture vertical. In that area, I was responsible for our developer tools and application platform. So customers kind of moved from frontline associates to software engineers, which very, very different customer base. Just kind of a shout out to continued education, right? While I was at Home Depot, I continued to take classes. Like I took about a class a year, professional ed at Georgia Tech. So like project management, formalized like PMP type process, some corporate finance and accounting and some other stuff. The last couple of years I was there, I did my MBA at UGA, go Dogs again. I was at the Terry campus in Atlanta, which that kind of opened my eyes to what was available there. A lot of people ask, like with a math computer science background, was the MBA worth it? I'd say like, I liked the experience a lot. It probably wouldn't have been as valuable to me if I'd done it right after college, just because like having the real world experience, especially at Depot, like with a large corporation, like real business education components that go into running a company of that size. But that kind of opened my eyes and made me look at exploring the job market a little bit as I was towards the tail end there. Because like in college, they encourage you to kind of review your resume, start talking to companies. And I had some mentors both inside and outside the company that suggested like for ongoing career development. I had been in Atlanta my whole career. They said, get some experience at least outside of the Southeast region. So started looking around different cities, San Francisco, Seattle, Chicago, Boston. Boston was kind of on the short list just because I had lived there before. I still had friends from college that were up there. had a few offers kind of towards the end. Really liked Wayfair, primarily because of the people that I interviewed with and like the company culture. I also liked the ability I hadn't been in a direct supply chain engineering role before, but having a math background, I was always into like process optimization and things like that. So a combination of like the people that I was interviewing with and talked to while I was there, as well as the role. So I'll pause here. Any questions about that kind of progression or anything? Cool. So let's jump into operational engineering. So up front, I'm going to say what it's not. And I'll preface that by saying we do have the stuff that I'm going to say that it's not. Wayfair has software teams that do all of this stuff, but we're just not going to talk about it today, right? So we're not talking about IT operations, which is generally more running the computers, running the systems, making sure they're up and available. We're also not talking about DevOps, which is kind of a blend of the operations and the software development kind of running in the same team. So like you're responsible for building the code, deploying the code, and then running the code infinitely. Great practice, should implement it, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're also not talking about consumer engineering. So we're not talking about apps or websites or anything that you could just kind of download or get to yourself. We're also not talking about other internal software like HR software, accounting software. That's kind of out of the scope here. What we are talking about is the software that allows and facilitates the smooth operation of the actual business that's generating revenue for the company. So in my particular role, obviously that's supply chain facilities, which includes warehouse management, transportation, a lot of interfaces with suppliers as well as third-party systems and internally developed softwares. It gets complicated fairly quickly. Outside of the supply chain context, it includes things like I mentioned, kind of the store operations software, so the stuff that allows you to run a retail store. And then also like factory operation software, which I have less direct experience in myself, but that's another kind of pillar of operational software in general. How do you see the impact? So in some cases, firms are able to leverage their expertise in areas in operational software where they can sell services or their own software systems to other companies, whether it be people in the same area or in some instances you'll see companies that will spin off like their supply chain division, for instance, and basically sell those services to other folks. But generally what you see more is costs out, right? So reducing the costs. And typically for a company to increase profit, it's usually a lot easier to do that by reducing ongoing operational costs than it is to like increase the top line revenue. So you can have a lot of efficiency gains in terms of doing the costs out. And as software engineers, we can bring the multiples are pretty quick when you're targeting field associates, right? So just to give a little bit of an illustrative example about that, if you look at say you've got 1,000 folks kind of on the field on the front lines at your software targets, and you make an improvement, say in like page loading times or like logical flows, so it's a little bit easier to get to like the end decision point. Save 30 seconds a day, that multiplies pretty quickly, 150K a year. And as you save more time, or as your kind of associate base increases, that multiplies obviously. Just one thing about that, it gives you just kind of a back of the napkin calculation of how impactful it is, but it's not actually true cost out unless one, you're reducing labor hours, or two, you're allocating that time savings to more high value activities, right? So if you're moving folks from like basically sitting at a terminal waiting to putting them on the sales floor and increasing like sales per hour, or putting them, instead of waiting on a terminal or waiting on a scan gun to process, they're actually actively loading trucks, right? That's a lot more productivity. So you generate cost savings in that fashion. So that's kind of why it's important to the company. A little bit about why I like it and why I find it important to me is that if you think about it, a lot of the folks that we target in our operations software, like they have to use the software as part of the job. It's not like an app or a website where you can just close it or go to a different website if it's not working, or a little bit frustrating to use. These people have to use the software to do their jobs all day, every day, and a lot of the times they have customers in front of them that are either waiting or getting angry, or in supply chain they may have truck drivers that have to get out that aren't, if you're not able to load the software. So any any improvements that you can make to the software directly impacts the quality of life of these folks. Because if you think about it, they're in their jobs, 8 hours a day, say a third of their life, they're having to be dependent on your software. So if there's any friction or frustration or anxiety that's associated with that, it's very important to get that out of the software system as quickly as you can. And the way that you do that, the way that I like to do that is actually like being in the field, talking to the folks that are doing the actual operations, and not just talking to them, but actually physically going to the facilities and doing the jobs that they're doing, right? So maybe every 2 or 3 months, I'd try to go to a facility and actually like check out a scan gun, load and unload trucks for a day, just because, you can do it for a couple hours too, but sometimes, 4 hours of walking around the floor with a hand dolly, moving around couches, the fatigue sets in. You start viewing the software and systems a little bit differently. And like I mentioned, just the quality of life in general, like if you think about it, going to work, if things work how you expect them to, it's a lot easier than running into issues and errors and waiting and not being able to do your job. I would say too, I think that another big impact is just the ability for the operations to move. Like I said, I'm kind of a process optimization person from the outset, so just seeing the efficiency gains also kind of speaks to it. As far as like different roles on teams that you see to make this happen, it varies a little bit company to company and even within companies, team to team, but you'll typically see, software engineering, obviously. You've got product management that's usually like understanding a little bit more closely the like where the technology industry as well as like the functional area is going, doing a little bit more of the discrete backlog building and road mapping. So like where are we bringing this software in the next 3 to 6 months? We also have folks that do like UX, user experience research and design. So the researchers will go out into the field and they're skilled at like interviewing and eliciting, potential improvements that folks might not necessarily just tell you directly, right? That's a very difficult thing to elicit. And then the UX designers who do more of the mock-ups and screen layouts and things, and they'll go, to the field with paper prototypes and see if they, they work out and whatnot. And then, like I said, software engineers who implement all that stuff. And then, it's typically pretty quick feedback cycles. The less time you spend building the software between, getting it out actually in use and in production and getting the feedback is going to serve you well going forward, because then you can make any tweaks. And, if you are going months before releasing the software, you may be accumulating bugs, or it may not even functionally work for the way that they're trying to do stuff. It's better to know that more quickly rather than later on down the process.